Ah, we've got the fellow that was talking about how Clone Wars is great. And he's gonna... So this will be an interesting discussion when he says Dune Part 2 sucks. But let's see what he says. Because I've watched it, and so we might get into some spoiler territory here. For your information. We're talking about specific parts.
Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. Time for the review and analysis of Dune Part 2. I realized I published the Substack article on this and I didn't make a video out of it. Be roughly the same ideas, but if I'm just talking to a camera, new things will come out, so hopefully this will be worth your time. The long and short of it is that Dune Part 2 sucks. And it sucks mostly because of the story. In fact, it fits into the big Hollywood pattern that I've seen at this point for a decade, which is that the audio-visual experience is excellent, but the story is trash. And in this case, the story is trash for a couple of big reasons, but the biggest one is changes from the book, which undermine all of the elements of the story working together to produce a coherent ending, as well as the casting and finally the bad exposition. This was a problem in Dune Part 1, and it's an even bigger problem in Dune Part 2, is the lack of exposition. David Lynch, in much shorter runtime, was able to explain what the spice does and why anyone cares about it. But in almost 6 hours of Denis Villeneuve movie, you don't actually know why anyone gives a crap about the spice. This is a...
See, I read the books in between Part 1 and Part 2 coming out. So I went into Part 2 knowing about the spice and that, since I read the books in between. The Great Dune trilogy I read, I haven't read any of the extra other ones, but I got an omnibus of that and read it, which was neat. But yeah, it does suffer from changes and omissions as part of the changes, I guess, as well, of like omissions of some details in the story that it doesn't work as well with.
Major oversight, and I realize a lot of fans miss this because, having read the books or seen the other movies, you know what the spice does. But in this case, there's no exposition on what the spice really does or why it matters to the galaxy. There's no spacing guild. Mentats exist in a couple of scenes, like in the first movie, but they're never explained why they're there. All the backstory,
yeah, so the Bene Gesserit are kind of explained in the movie, but so many of the other, like the Mentats and the Spacing Guild and that, aren't covered at all. And it's one of the things that I was going, well, any adaptation will suffer a bit from it, but you really need to have, like, that's one of the more interesting parts of the book that I found, is that they explain about the different pathways that humanity have gone with the different factions, the different philosophies of what they do to improve human evolution type thing. And you completely miss that in Denis Villeneuve's version, or however you pronounce his name.
All the richness of the setting, you know, the Butlerian jihad, all that kind of stuff is just missing. It's missing in action, and so we don't really have a good idea of why anyone's motivated to care about the spice in Dune. That's a major problem. Now, before I get to that, let me talk about the really good things in the movie, which was this audiovisual experience. And Dune Part 2, like Part 1, is really interesting as far as the audiovisual experience goes. If you were to take each element of the movie on its own, I would say I don't like it. That is, the production elements. I don't like the score. I don't like the visual style. I don't like the cinematography. However, the visual style is appropriate for the planet Arrakis.
So, my opinion would be, I like the visual, well, I like the cinematography and a lot of it, but I find that because of the setting of Arrakis and it not really going elsewhere as much, throughout the whole movie you have browns, shades of brown, you have, well, there's a black and white sequence which is really cool, but then that's all darker colours as well and very simple. It was a cool sequence, I like that one. And then you might get a scene. There was one scene, I can only remember one scene in part 2 where they go to a planet and there's actually greenery on the planet. And that's in one small scene to do with the Bene Gesserit. But the actual cinematography, like the framing and composition I like. The lighting for the most part I like. Apart from when scenes are way too dark and so you can't see the characters' eyes when they're talking, especially as I'm thinking of, like, there was one that I remember in part 2 where it was, they were having a point where they were having an emotional connection between two characters and they weren't, you weren't able to see their eyes to be able to get the full depth of emotion from it. That's the problem I have with that. And then part 1 had it being too dark in parts 2, like, I think it's when the big worm looming above and that is so dark that it's hard to see properly unless you're in a cinema. And when you're watching it at home, especially afterwards, it's like, well, I can't see anything much.
The score fits with the overall workings of the movie, the overall aesthetics of the movie. It fits very tight with him. It's a score that really treads in on the ground of sound design. And
yeah, the score works with the sound design, but I don't think I noticed there was any piece of music that stood out to me. And there are definitely movies with great soundtracks that I like. I go, I really want to listen to that again, just the music. And this wasn't one of them.
Indeed, the sound design where I could listen to individual sounds and say, those are really annoying, they work. Although I did get a little bit tired of the super loud, farty, sub-bass noises whenever a machine shows up. First time I heard it, I was like, that's cool. Like the 9th time, I was like, I'm done with the farts. I'm done with my subwoofer farting at me, okay?
That is an issue if you're trying, like, rewatching it. I only watched it once in the cinema so far, so... I mean, if you're wondering, like, we could watch it together on Discord and I'll have a rewatch of it. I wouldn't mind doing that because it's like the first time is always a bit different because it's your first impression of it and it's all new to you. Whereas a rewatch, you go, okay, I can dig deeper into it.
So, but overall, the integration.
Yeah, that's the problem I find, like, so, they say, oh yeah, it's the greatest sci-fi movie, or the modern one or whatever, someone said. I'm like, not really. It feels, like, the way that it's adapted, because they omit so much of the story elements that were more interesting to me and make the world more unique, feels a lot more generic sci-fi than when I read the book. But then also I recognise that a bunch of the stuff from the book you wouldn't be able to translate to screen very well. But you could have more of that in there, at least.
I think is what I said in the article. The integration of all the audiovisual elements into one experience is one of the best holistic integrations of all those styles that I've seen in a movie. Even though I don't like the individual parts, the whole is much more than the sum of its parts. And so the audiovisual experience ends up being really good, including the sound design. In fact, the only filmmaker that I can think of who does a better job fully integrating everything is probably George Lucas. But that is a story for a different day. Suffice to say, those elements are really well done.
I was just checking, Greg Fraser's done the cinematography for the Batman as well, and that was very dark. It looks nice once it's light enough. But what else have I watched? Oh, Snow White and the Huntsman. I haven't watched for ages. I don't remember that well enough to speak on the cinematography. Otherwise, I haven't seen much of what he's done.
A lot of care put into the sets. The sets have this weird, especially the interiors have this weird, cool, sparse feeling to it. If you look too closely, you realize some of the problems, like nobody has any objects in any of their rooms. Like all the rooms don't have the things people would use in them, right? They're not furnished. Like, people don't have objects. You think that the people in the movie own nothing. But that kind of goes with Arrakis, which is this empty desert planet of nothing but dunes. And
that can be explained away. Like, you do, from memory, you see more objects people have in the off-worlder settlements, whereas when it's in the Fremen places, it can be explained story-wise. But you would think that they would have a few more things than what they have there. I also imagined how it looked differently, but that's how it goes. When you read a book, you read the descriptions, imagine it differently in my head to how it looks.
Maybe a couple little mice here and there. But like I said, it works together to create a harmonious whole. If you were to look too close at the sets, about where are the objects, it kind of works with how everything ends up getting put together. There is one audiovisual element that is it's original, it's added, and it's probably the only thing that I feel like is added that's honestly really good, and that was the Harkonnen planet, I think Getty Prime, where it's almost in black and white. Now the thing about the movie is that it's basically a monochrome movie. It's just yellow it's like yellow or sepia toned instead of just black and white. It's a movie with little
shades of browns, yellows a bit and stuff, all that type of thing, which when you're looking at the colour in a movie, it's like the David Lynch version had a lot more colour in it.
To no color throughout it. So when we just have a palette shift away from yellow to black and white, it looks really cool. So we go to Getty Prime. Everything's in so desaturated that it looks monochrome. Everybody's got very pale white skin. All of the environments are black and white. And like I said, that audiovisual experience as the whole really comes together on Getty Prime. Those are some really cool extra scenes that aren't from the book, but they do help to characterize the Baron as well as his nephew. That's going to be kind of the main antagonist. We have this technique, and we've used it. I've seen it used before in some notable movies, including Fellowship of the Ring, where you have you kind of build up a minor character because the main character needs to kill someone at the end. And in fact, Fade Rotha is actually killed. I think that's his name. Is killed at the end of the first Dune book. Paul kills him in a duel, in a very intense duel. So you build him up as a real threat, as a real antagonist. You give him responsibility over the troops. You have him do things. You have him show his power over the other Harkonnens, so that it's really satisfying when Paul beats him. So it's one of these story algebra things that ended up producing, I think, a really cool sequence. So I will say that sequence is definitely a very fun sequence to watch, and it also exists to sort of...
That'd be my favourite part of the movie, is when it shifts to that his face when I paused it. But that'd be my favourite part of the movie, is the black and white section on the Harkonnen planet. It really stood out to me, and it was pretty cool.
Barely give a tiny bit of exposition on the Bene Gesserit witches and what their aim is, but it doesn't give you enough information on the Kwisatz Haderach, or however you want to say it, to really understand all of their motivations. And this, I'm going to transition into the story elements here. The story, like I said, is probably the worst thing. The glaring and horrible error of the first movie is only amplified further here in the second movie, and that is the casting. This is some of the worst casting that I can think of in a Hollywood movie. Timothée Chalamet may be fine in some other movie, but he is not a good Paul Atreides. He has no charisma. He's just a dead fish on screen. He's completely wayfish. He whispers his lines. He's totally effeminate. He's just a terrible choice for what should be a heroic and charismatic character.
Yeah, that is a disconnect that I was thinking of. Is he says it, and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Damn it. And here I was thinking about probably the worst one was Zendaya as Chani, because I don't think that works either as well as if they picked someone that maybe fit the role better but wasn't as known. But of course people watch it because, oh, I like Zendaya, she's in it. It's also hard to see the emotional turmoil he's going through and all of that properly when, like, you're not seeing this charismatic heroic character being broken down and then staying resolute, and then, yeah, anyway, that's story stuff. It doesn't, like, yeah. What else is he in? Let me see what else Timothy Chalamet is in. Like, I thought that it wasn't too bad, but it's like, obviously it's not the same as the book. And I have a big problem with audio-wise of people sounding like they're whispering so much that you can hardly hear them, but that's also an issue with the audio mixing in new movies. No, he hasn't done anything else that I've watched. Yeah, that's true.
And that character needs to be heroic and charismatic for the plot to actually happen. Okay, so people have pointed out, I think on the Substack, they're like, Frank Herbert was, he was very cynical about religion. It's like, that's great, but the characters aren't. And so the characters are a huge misfire in this case. But yeah, Timothy Chalamet, worst casting decision. Second worst, actually, because the worst is Zendaya as Chani. Absolutely ruins this movie. Any potential that this movie would have had for me to, like, forgive this casting of this waifish, effeminate Paul Atreides. Nope. We are going to hammer it into the ground with the worst, most annoying character I've seen in years on screen, and that is Zendaya as Chani. She looks awful. They just shoot her in a way so she's never attractive looking at all. And you look at other photos of her and you're like, I know she has the potential to not look bad, but she looks really bad in this movie. It's like the bad costume, the bad framing of her face, the bad hairdo. She looks bloated, like she just ate a whole ham and drank like a gallon of water. She just looks awful in the movie. But that's just the start, right? Because she hates Paul. She's supposed to be Paul's wife and lover of his, like, his Fremen wife, and bear his children in future books, right? And she's got him all the way. She's number one believer in Paul. No, she actually hates Paul in this movie. I don't know why she ends up with him. She's constantly saying bad things to him and about him, and constantly.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense in the movie. That's true.
Crying and upset about the things that Paul does. She's extremely cynical about religion, which she exists. Maybe my idea is she exists as like an insert for Denis Villeneuve, who's probably agnostic because everyone in Hollywood likes to think that they are. They just subscribe to a different cult, in my opinion. But she exists to be cynical about religion and to basically be an insert for the opinions of the filmmakers. And it's awful. It's a bad reason to do that. The reality is that the entire plot of the first Dune book works because people are religiously motivated in the book. So if it's a cautionary tale about being religiously motivated, hey, maybe that's what it is. But the point is, the characters actually care about religion. They believe in religion. They believe in, the Bene Gesserit have their religion, and the Fremen have their religion and their prophecies, and they believe in these things. Maybe messianic characters are dangerous, right? Because Frank Herbert certainly saw, like, the Jonestown stuff and the rise of charismatic leaders and stuff in the United States. But the characters have to believe that. And the fact that the only character who actually believes it is Stilgar. Yeah, Stilgar, that's right. So Stilgar is the only one who believes it. And because Stilgar is the only character who believes it, it just doesn't work. Like, the plot doesn't come together or work. Even Paul's mother is like, let's use the Fremen. Even Paul has a really cynical view of religion. He's going to manipulate the Fremen into doing what he wants in order to exact revenge on the Emperor and things like that. And so...
Yeah, and yeah, in the book, there was so much of a struggle with him of, like, I don't want to use the Fremen that way. But it is the only way that I would be able to fulfill my destiny and avenge my family and all of that. And over Arrakis and stop the Harkonnens from hurting more people. All of that.
Yeah, it just doesn't work. Chani exists. I don't know why she's even in the movie. She doesn't really do anything. At one point, they have her come in and save Paul. So she comes in. Paul has drank the water of life, which is like this blood of the baby, you know, the baby sandworm. And he's in a coma, and she like cries a tear on him and like brings him back to life. Okay, that's a really weird addition. But even then, she doesn't believe in his like ascendancy to be a messiah. She just
Yeah, I saw the scene and I'm like, well, there's no way she actually brought him back to life. It's... what's his body doing stuff? There's details in the books of why... that are missed in the movie, basically. There's a lot missed in the movie. There's one plot point that I'll bring up if he doesn't
believe in him at all. She just shows up on a sandworm out of nowhere for no reason to save Paul so that a woman can save Paul, and then goes off. And the end of the movie ends when like Paul sets up like, I'm gonna marry the Princess Irulan, and then she just goes off into the desert. She's like, screw you. You know, it's like Denis Villeneuve really wanted to make Paul the bad guy. But when you read the first Dune book, you don't get the sense that Paul is the bad guy. He's a very heroic character. That kind of stuff, the flaws of his thinking, that comes in later books. That's for the next movies that you're going to do. Trying to convict your main character, it just messes up the storytelling horribly. So it is one of these things where we have what some people call a deconstructive narrative, where we're taking the source material and we're almost making a parody out of it. The entire movie is about the disapproval of what the characters are doing in the source material. So it comes off as completely insincere. When you finally get to the Emperor, you still don't have any understanding of his motivation for wiping out the Atreides clan. You don't know why he did it. He gives this very, very badly written line that's like, I did it because he was weak. Christopher Walken, also a bad casting choice. It's hard to find good casting choices in this. Maybe Javier Bardem as Stilgar. I think he was good, but he just like he could really carry a scene, and he tends to dominate other actors when he's in the scene because of his on-screen charisma is very powerful. Right. What we needed was a younger actor that had a lot of charisma to be Paul Atreides. This doesn't work with Timothée Chalamet, and of course. The movie ends with this kind of unexpectedly, I think he was trying to make Paul seem like a bad guy, but he just seems badass unintentionally for the ending. So the meta of the ending is Paul gathers up the Fremen to go and conquer the universe, which is pretty badass, while his... this is awful to say. His mulatto girlfriend runs off into the desert and he marries the blonde princess. Okay. That's the ending that you get. Now that's pretty different from the books, right? The books, it actually kind of settles things that are happening in the planet. It's not like all of the other planets are coming in to fight above the planet now. How did they get there? Well, since we left the whole spacing guild, one of the big reasons why anyone cares about the spice, because we left that out of the movie. Yeah, we can just have all the other clans. We can have all the other high houses just like teleport into Dune to have a war above it with the Fremen or whatever. And that's how the movie ends. So this isn't a resolution. This is an anti-resolution.
Yeah, that's the big problem with it too. It's like that's where the first book ends, and then it has resolutions in the book because it does solve a lot of the problems. And of course there's sequels because it's like, oh yeah, their life still carries on and whatever. But the first book actually does have things settled, like he says.
So it's one of the worst movie endings that I've seen from a storytelling perspective, and it's one of the unexpectedly, unintentionally most based endings from like a meta perspective, where Denis Villeneuve is really trying to make Paul seem like a bad guy, and he just seems really badass, and that's just how it ends up happening. I think it's like an unintentional thing from his perspective. So overall, it's thumbs down. For me, I would say that if you look at the audio-visual experience as a holistic experience, that's like a 9 out of 10. It's really good, other than too much farting noises for the Okay.
Yeah, that's the only thing I remember of the music. I don't remember any other woman music from it. I just remember the and that's like the identity of the soundtrack. Yeah. Well, because they had no world building that they explained outside of the actual planet of Arrakis. And of course they had to include some of the Bene Gesserit and didn't even fill out those properly. There was no reason for anyone to even come to fight over the planet.
Get a little tired of that sound. Okay. But otherwise it's good. I will say the mix is better for part 2, at least watching it at home. Everything's really clear and audible. The dialogue's much more audible, including the Wayfish, Timothy Chalamet. The problem with the story's like a 4 or 5 out of 10. The main reason is that there's not enough exposition. We don't know why anyone cares about the spice. We don't know why anyone has the motivation other than Stilgar. Stilgar's the only person who has any motivation to do anything that we understand, right? Or Paul, we just kind of throw a revenge plot on top of him instead of something bigger. Like he has bigger things in the book. So
yeah, bigger things because of what the spice does to him.
If you enjoyed some of the elements from Dune Part 2 or you just enjoyed the movie, I would encourage you to read that first Dune book and really enjoy it. And when you get to that first Dune book and you get that great conclusion, my dog is having a little coughing fit, so I apologize for that, then you can decide whether you want to read the remaining books because they are very weird compared to the first one. And the first one's weird enough. So anyway, that's about it for today. I hope you guys will...
So one of the big plot points that I have an issue with is that the Fremen couldn't take over Arrakis because the Atreides and the Harkonnens, the Off-Worlders, had superior training to fight them apart from their way of ambushing and things, and so the Fremen didn't understand the way that they fought. And then in the movie, it does nothing about that. Actually, I don't think they even mention it. It just goes, oh yeah, the Fremen can fight them. And I'm like, well, in the movie, it's like, well, if the Fremen can fight them like that anyway, why did they need Paul to lead them to fight against the Harkonnens and all that? Whereas in the book, I remember clearly that he taught them about the way that they fight at House Atreides and the way that he was taught, especially with the shields that you have to go slowly through so that it actually impacts, because it huns up at any fast item, like a knife stabbing at them, the shield will stop. But if you're using the knife slowly, it'll go past the shield and then you stab it in. As details, but that allowed the Fremen to be able to understand the shields and the technology and the way that they fight, which gave them the edge as well when he was leading them to be able to defeat the Off-Worlders, the Harkonnens, because they all use the shields and stuff. And that's ties back into part 1 too, with him being taught how to fight, and then it comes full circle where he's teaching others.
Have a great day. Let me know what you think down below in the comment section, because I am always interested to see what other people have to say about this kind of stuff. And yeah, that's it. Maybe there's something from the Substack article I didn't put in this one. I can do like a by the numbers analysis a little bit later if you want me to break down like every single element and talk about why it's bad.
So I think if you don't know the books, if you go into it like, okay, I don't know anything about Dune, and you watch the movies, things won't make sense. But like the first one wasn't as bad. You could look at it and go, this is a fairly generic sci-fi. Whereas I find that like the first Hunger Games movie, I watched it with Mum when it came out sometime at home or whatever. And I was explaining to her some of the way that the world works, because they never explained it in the movie, because I'd read the books. And I'm like, okay, I have that understanding. But for the layperson that doesn't know anything about the world and that, they don't get any information on the important things, and especially some of the more interesting things about Dune that separates it from other sci-fi. I think that's really a missed opportunity to show with the movies. And the pacing of part 2 ends up being like they cut things out so that they'd have more time for the action and that, and it's like, well, it's not that kind of story, really. The action sort of comes secondary to all of the philosophical things going on in the story and the politics and that. And so you lose that a bit too.
Big downsides are the casting, the characters, the no exposition, and that ruins all the setup for the plot. It just comes off as nonsensical. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think, and I'll see you all next time.
Yeah. Like, the experience watching it in the cinema was good. That's where the cinematography and the audio and that all work together fairly well. But then even looking at it from, okay, whatever happens there, I miss things, and I'm like, well, if I had not read the books, I would not know what's going on. And it would be interesting to see someone that doesn't know the books watch it and see. That could be an interesting thing of why we'd watch it like on. Because I don't think you've read the books, have you? That's also the problem. When they do, like, I get the type of story could not be interesting anyway, but when they do a not very good adaptation of it where they miss all of the like, I don't want to read the future books after the 3 I read, but because I got the omnibus, but yeah, that there's more to it in the book than nihilism and stuff, but I can see where that's a thing. But also, you see the movies and it doesn't give you all of the interesting world building and things that were really separate it from other sci-fi. It does get weird, but yeah. Because Paul goes on this whole arc where he becomes emperor, but then the power corrupts him and all of that stuff, and so it's this whole thing of, I saw it as power corrupts people, which isn't necessarily true, but I guess in that case it worked for the setting. Yeah. That's it.